Welcome back everybody. The intention for the next two videos is to be looking at how I would go about building the two sample objects that we've done as starter activities between the Kahoots over the past 2 weeks. So the first one that we looked at was Sputnik. I've got the example graphic on the board which we used as our reference photo. I'm going to break it down first and foremost before I show you my attempt and before we actually go about building it. The key characteristic here, the main starting object is without doubt the sphere, the main body of Sputnik. So we can see that we've got a main object here. What we also have, the key characteristic of the antenna, and we have these antennae that are coming off, and there's 4 of them in total. But what we're going to look at here is how we can break those 2 major parts down into smaller components to make our life easier to build them. The idea when you're making any object is to look at the principal objects and go, what is it closest to? If you can't answer that, perhaps the object can be broken down into smaller parts, and then you may be able to answer that question. What is it closest to as a primitive or extended primitive object? Without doubt, the sphere is closest to a sphere, and the antenna is perhaps closest to a cylinder. That's pretty obvious. What is not obvious is how we may be able to get these slight ridges as we go around Sputnik's body. There are 2 of them. I'm not sure if you can see them on my screen, but there's 2 of them as they run around. We also have quite a complicated looking little object here. We also have a little bit more detail here, here, and here. To me, they're 4 separate objects. We also have a cylinder here, but I haven't included that in my example. So we've got 1, 2, 3 objects. From an aesthetic perspective, that could be broken down into smaller parts, or more accurately, we could just simplify it as 1, 2, 3, and wonder, is our user ever going to notice the difference? We also have this cylinder here, which is notable by having a bit of a expanded point here as the antenna goes a little bit wider. That I wouldn't do as a separate object. I think that we can do that as a cylinder that has a little bit of edit poly applied just to expand a small section. And we also have these areas here, 2 little vents. Don't really know what they do. I'm sure with a bit of research we could find out. And what you'll find, the more capable the graphic artist, the more they will know about the object they are modelling, even if it is completely fictitious. If it's fictitious, it must work in your universe, or whatever the fictitious universe is. So if there's a little vent, if there's a jet propulsion, if there's a cape on a character, we need to know how it's going to behave and what its purpose is in order to accurately model it. The obvious giveaway with Sputnik as a model as well is that it's got the same thing 4 times. There is no point modelling the same thing 4 times. We're going to be using a lot of clone, a lot of mirror to look at areas of similarity and build the object elements of the object just enough times to actually construct it. So without further ado, here is my attempt. What we can see with Sputnik here is we have our antenna, we have the sphere, we have some principal objects that have gone into it, and we also have a little bit of detailing on here. Could be a little bit more detailed. Obviously I haven't texture mapped it and I've kept it as the generic colour so we could see. Very easily I could change that to a bit more of a silver colour, or using mental ray I could make it a highly reflective texture or a material. But for now, let's talk about the principal objects. I've chosen to make my sphere, and it's obviously at 0.000. Remember, right click on the select to move object to take it to 0, 0, 0. What I've then got is a box, a box, a box, a cylinder. That's all pretty obvious. But you may be wondering how I've turned a box into these objects here. I'll explain that in a moment. What I've also got is a torus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this one. I'm going to start again. I'm going to show you how I did it. So one of the starting things we need to do is start with the principal object. Whatever is going to be the main focus or the main body of your object, I always recommend you start with that. There are some exceptions, but generally this will work well for you. I'm going to make a sphere. I can make it anywhere because one of the first things I'm going to do is right click on the move and put that into the center of my world, the point of origin 0, 0, 0. Remember 0 tab, 0 tab, 0 tab, or 0 enter. I'm going to go to the modifier panel with my sphere selected, and I'm going to give this a value that I feel will work. 25 will work fine. I've also increased the default segments from 32 to 64. The only reason I've done 64 is to make it look more spherical, more round. What I'm now going to do is look at the other principal elements we're going to start with building. Now, I've got my reference photo open here, and I'm going to start by finishing all the key parts for the sphere. I'm going to build the body as one piece, then I'm going to build one antenna, and then I'm going to duplicate the antenna. So what I'm going to start with building is these ridges here. There's a bunch of different ways we could do it, and there's no right or wrong way to do it, but I'm going to use a torus. So on the Create panel, under the Standard Primitives, we have a torus. Torus, there it is. Now I want to show you how best to make this. I made Sputnik so it was facing this direction here, following this plane here. You can make it any direction, it really doesn't matter. I wouldn't recommend having it face up, but it's entirely up to you as long as you are consistent. What I don't want you to do is to make it so the antenna, if I create a quick example using a cylinder, never try and create an object that it's a bit of an angle. So if I said had it kind of rotating that way, and if that were to be the direction of one of the antenna, the reason is that's just really awkward to align every time. So what I recommend is you build your object facing one direction, it doesn't really matter what it is, but pick one, and then you can rotate it once it's all together. So we're going to start with this torus. If I create a torus in my world, doesn't matter where I create it, it will always make it on the flat plane of that view, like we covered in the previous video. So because I want this to be created around the object on as if it were there, or as if it were running down that line there, that's perhaps not the best view to create it, because I'll need to rotate it. There's no harm in that, but it's just a little bit of work that I can avoid. So if I were to create a torus in this viewport, well, I can see that that's kind of working, but it's still facing the wrong direction. So in my case, if I made it on the left viewport instead, that's now facing the correct direction that I'm looking for. Again, if you're wondering why my view may be slightly different to yours, I've turned on edged faces, which I can turn on here. Click on that edged faces, so I get a slightly different view to what you get, but that's just for my convenience. I also strongly encourage you put that in the middle of your world again. The advantage here that spherical objects, such as a torus or a sphere, have their point of origin in their centre, meaning they line up really nicely. Now, if we know that our sphere is 25 units in radius, I can guess that this is going to be 25 units in radius as well. I'm going to move this up just so you can see what the numbers do. So that radius there refers to how big the outside amount is going to be, and radius 2 refers to how thin or thick it's going to be, so the radius of the edge rather than the radius of the cylinder or the circle of it. So if I know that's going to be 25, and I'm going to set my radius to quite thin, I'm going to set it to about 0.2. And if I drop that again, so it's in the middle of my world, 0, 0, 0, that's okay. A little bit too thin, perhaps, because 25 is exactly the same as the radius of my object, so I've only got 0.2 poking out. So perhaps if I did 27. Again, if you're trying to find these values, grab the slider and move the slider until you're happy with it, and then perhaps just round the values so you're happy with them. You don't have to round them. There are some cases where you want them to be a decimal, but it's a habit I'm in. Now you'll notice though these rings don't really follow the midpoint. They seem to be, from this perspective, a little bit further back. So this ring, I'm going to move it backwards, again just moving my viewport, but now I've got a problem if it appears to be hovering. So I'm just going to reduce the radius until it fits, and I'm just going to tap down on those arrows until I'm kind of happy with it. So I'm kind of happy with that. Next thing I want to do is make another torus. So I could go through the rigmarole of making another one, resizing it, but we don't do that, we're lazy. Shift and drag will make a clone. Remember, what I want here is a copy. I don't want an instance because I want one to be different to the other. Remember, if that didn't work or rotated, you need to be using the move, select and move. So shift and drag to make your duplicate. I'm going to reduce the radius of this until that's broadly in place. So that looks okay. Remember, if yours is a bit lopsided or it's coming through on one side and not the other, that is because you need to line it up with your sphere, which is why lining it up to the middle of your world is always such a good idea when you start off. So I've got those two rings that are there. That looks okay. What I'm now going to do is create these little bits of detailing here. The way I'm going to go about doing this is exactly the same process, but it's going to be a torus that I'm going to scale. Again, I'm going to grab this torus that is here because we're already working on one. I'm going to make a copy, not an instance. I'm going to reduce the radius down, and I'm just going to have this one so it's poking right out the back. Obviously, that's far too big. It's starting to look a little bit like a Pokeball. Maybe that's something you want to make. So I'm just going to scale this down. Now, I am going to take a little bit of creative freedom with this one. It's going to look like Sputnik, but it's not going to be an accurate representation of it. Using only one image as reference means I can't line things up properly. I don't know what's on the opposite side of the sphere, for example. I don't know if there's another one of these just off-site. I could easily research it, and I recommend that you do, but for our purposes today, I'm going to have one roughly in the center and one below and to the right of it. What I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to reduce the radius, reduce it down, line it up so it's broadly in the center, and the way I know it's in the center is it's following this black line here, which is the middle of my world. But this time I'm going to use scale, and I'm going to scale it in my case on the z-axis. If I move this out, you can see why I'm doing this. It creates more of a ring effect out of your torus. So I can create something that looks like that. Really good for the barrel of a gun, or really good for anything that you need to be, obviously perhaps a ring or something along those lines. Now if I put that back in position, you can see in my example that's poking all the way through the back of Sputnik, but I don't care, and neither will your viewer, neither will your user. Because if they can't see it, it can't hurt them. I'm just going to put that there. We could add a little bit of additional detailing in there, but I'm going to leave that as an exercise for yourself. What I'm now going to do is take a duplicate of that in exactly the same way. I'm going to move it to the right, I'm going to move it down. But if you notice in our reference photo, this doesn't seem to be facing the same direction that is. It seems to be facing out from the sphere. So we need to do a little bit of rotation. I'm going to eyeball this one. Now again, this is a brilliant use for changing it from view to local, because if I want to rotate now on an axis, if I want to rotate it down on here, it's actually really difficult. So that doesn't look ideal. But if I change it from view to local, I can now rotate along its local axis and have that point outwards. If I also go local on the move, I can move it inwards and outwards on its axis rather than the world axis, which can be of great benefit. I'm going to put that there, and I'm going to go back to view mode. So we could add a bit of detailing there if you want to. Now the difficult bit, which I think is the bit that caused quite a bit of difficulty in the lesson itself, which is how to create the antenna. I'm going to break it into 1, 2, 3 components, and then the actual antenna itself. I'm going to start at the furthest point and work backwards. I'm not going to start with the cylinder, I'm going to start with the way it connects to the sphere. As I do this, please note that I can't do it in one, and I don't think anybody can. I can't look at these things and just decide, yep, I know exactly how to do that. It does take experimentation and a trial and error. What I have noticed from this is this seems to be quite a bit further forward from these toruses that we're using for our ridge. So I'm going to put it in. I'm going to use the top view to create this. Now notice that when I create it, it'll make it on the plane of my world, which is smack bang in the middle of Sputnik's sphere. So once we've made it on that plane, we'll need to move it up. I've also changed my defaults so they don't create a box with just, on the modifier panel, with just one segment. I have it so it creates with multiple, and I'm going to show you why. Because we're going to use edit poly to change this. Also, I just rotated the front viewport by mistake, didn't want to. If you want to undo that, Control and Z doesn't do it. Shift and Z undoes a viewport rotation that you didn't want. Bonus fact. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to line this up back to 0, 0, 0, and then move it up. Because if you line it up on all the axes, then it's easy just to move on the axes you want, because I don't want it modified in the Y. What I can now do is create this shape here. I'm going to rotate my object so I'm looking at it in the same way that the image is. It always helps if you do that. And I can see I want a relatively straight bit and then a dip. So what I need is 1, 2, 3 segments to this box. I'm going to do this so it's outside the sphere so you can see. So I want 1, 2, 3 segments to this box. And you can see that new one it's created in there, that one in the middle. So even though I've put 2 segments in, it's actually made 1, 2, 3 lines that I can utilize. Edit Poly is the tool of choice. So modifier panel, Edit Poly, not Edit Mesh, Edit Poly. I may have mentioned before, this is the best tool ever. What I'm going to do with Edit Poly is very simply, I'm going to grab, using Edge mode, this frontmost edge, move it down. And suddenly that looks very close to that object there. Very close to it. I could add additional detailing to this by adding a ridge down here, because it seems to be a little bit curved. I don't know if you can see it there, but it doesn't seem to be a straight top. You might make the mistake of thinking if you go back to box, it will give me a warning to say, are you sure you want to fiddle with your original box? We can say, yeah, that's totally fine. If I try to add a segment running down here at this point, it will confuse edit poly. So if I add an additional length segment, whoa, see what it's done? It's completely confused how it was going to create it. It put the right edge in, but it then has detected I've modified that edge in edit poly. So at this point, once you've started making changes, I recommend you use Edit Poly's tools. So with Edit Poly active, I'm going to go to Edge Mode. I'm going to select this edge here, Control click for that edge, and Control click for that edge. What this will allow me to do is to connect them together. Button there, Connect. So I've just had to scroll down using the hand there, Connect. I want to click the little box next to it to go to its settings, and this will say how many do you want to connect, because we can pinch them or we can slide them from side to side, but we don't want any pinch, we don't want any slide, and we just want one new element adding, new segment, or we can add many. I just want one. What I can now do with this new segment is move it up, which creates a bit of a domed effect. The more segments you have and the more gradual your height increase, the better that will look and the more rounded it will look. Remember that a sphere is nothing more than a series of straight edges. So with that there, what I'm going to do is build my antenna as if it were straight. I'm going to build it straight and then I'm going to rotate the entire contraption once I've built it all together. So that's my first bit effectively done. I'm now going to build this bit and skip this bit out. I'm not going to bother doing that because I don't think a user would notice. So I'm going to make an abstraction here and I'm going to make a creative decision to say, nope, I'm going to go straight onto this. This bit, I'm going to use a box again. Now, I've already got a box that's been heavily modified, but it's in the right place. I'm going to take a clone of my box, same way as before, holding down Shift and making a copy. But this time, if I delete Edit Poly, it'll go back to the original box settings. Makes my life a little bit easier. What I want here, though, and I don't know if you can see this particularly well, I want 1, 2, 3 segments. So what I want is, instead of just the 2 that we've got here, I want 3. I want a bit, a bit, a bit. And we're going to again use Edit Poly to deform this. All I want to do here is using vertex mode. Keep in mind you can click on the plus and change the modes there as well. Using vertex mode, notice how I've rotated my camera from that angle there to square on. You can also use the little box to do that as well. But what I don't want, I want to select these objects here, those vertices there. If I'm looking at it at this angle, if I look at this angle and I select, what I will do is accidentally select things I don't want. Selection is 9/10 of the battle. You're going to hear me say that an awful lot, 9/10 of the battle. What this means is line your camera up to make your life easy. The reason why I've selected these vertices here is I'm going to use the scale tool to scale them away from each other on the x-axis. So do you see what I'm doing? I'm making the middle one really big and I'm making the outer ones really small. What I can then do is use polygon mode, or I can click on here on the drop down. I want to select all of those polygons. Again, I'm using the same trick. Remember that when you make a rectangular marquee, a selection like that, you only need to touch a polygon with the angle or with the marquee. So I'm just going to do drag select there, and I'm going to do a drag select there. If you accidentally select one thing too many, you can just press Alt to deselect. What I'm going to do here is I'm just checking around to make sure I haven't selected the wrong thing by mistake. I'm going to click Extrude, and I'm going to increase the extrusion amount. Now that will look awful. That doesn't do what I want it to do. That is because it is doing it by the group normal. This button at the top, group normals. I don't want it to do it by group normals. I want to do it by local normals. So do you see what I did there? Local normals means for each selection that I've got, each ring of selections, find the average and deal with each one. Whereas what polygon does is one at a time. So if you wanted to do like a red cross or you wanted to do something like that, you can extrude them individually. You can extrude them as a group, which doesn't always do what you want it to do, or local normals. Local normals is the one I want here. Remember what normals means is the direction each polygon is facing. Okay, so that looks really, really not far off that, with the exception of there's a dome on it in the same way we had before. So I'm going to use the same trick. Now notice what I do here. I want to select that and that and that and that and that and that and that. So I can control click, or I could line my camera up like that and do a drag select for all of them. You see how that's selected all the way through? I'm on edge mode to do this, by the way. Now if I connect in the same way I did before, it will connect and draw a line all the way through. So I can now move, remember the shortcut for that is W, move them all up. Wow, kind of rounded. Also a good way of making something like a barn or a house that's going to have a point to it. So far so good. I could have made this with one big piece, but I've chosen to make it in multiple separate pieces. And then finally, I'm going to make this piece here, which again I'm going to make out of a box using largely the same techniques. Shift, drag, OK, go away edit poly, I don't want you, I want a new edit poly. And what this one is going to have to do is it's going to have a bit of a point like we've had before, and then it's going to come up a little bit. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to put my edge in just the way we did before. So I'm going to select all of those, connect and put a new edge in. I'm going to raise everything up so it's similar to the old one. But what's going to be different is this point here. I'm going to need another segment. I can be more efficient about this, but I'm going to create a new segment that joins all of those together. Connect, going to join all of those together, and I can move all of those up, just forming the first bit of that. And I can move these vertices. Sorry, I'm going to go in vertex mode for this. I'm going to move these vertices. Hard to see, but I know they're there. I'll move those up as well. That gives me the bit of a ridge that I'm looking for. If you think it's too extreme, you can click on those points, perhaps move them down if you don't want it to be there. But the idea is there. Perhaps I want to move that one down as well. Looks alright. Edit poly, best tool ever. What I'm now going to do is use my cylinder to create from there. Watch how I do this. I'm going to make my cylinder, and I'm going to do it again in the left viewport, because that's me looking square on the objects I've already got. So I'm going to create my cylinder, and I'm looking in the other viewport. So I'm just going to move my mouse so you can see I'm looking in the viewport. So in my front viewport, I can see that if I move up, that goes forward, whereas I want it to go backwards. So I'm just going to have it move backwards. What I'm now going to do is move it to where I want. I'm not going to align it smack bang to the middle of my world in this case. I'm just going to move it on the Y to line those things up, because I do want it on the Z at that height. Again, I can square things up. Now notice the Z here doesn't correspond with the Z that's on screen. It's the global Z. What I'm now going to do is just move that out, and I'm going to decrease the height to extend it to however much I think is relevant. And I'm just going to eyeball this. When my tested this, I think about 150 looked okay. So I'm going to do about minus 150. Looks okay. Now this needs rotating. Now I could rotate each thing individually. Please don't do that. Actually, before we do that, we're going to do edit poly on our cylinder just to create that small area of ridge there. Little bit of detailing that looks nice. Very little effort, but looks good. Edit poly, best tool ever. May have mentioned it before. Go to vertex mode. Now what I'm going to do is grab these three collections of vertices, scale them together, which will do nothing, and then the ones in the middle, I'm going to scale them out. Now watch how I do this. If I scale it on the Y, that works, but not on the Z, and that's what I want. I want it on the Z as well. So I can do that, but that's maybe imperfect. I may have got it wrong. So if I hover over the triangle in between, it will do both axes at the same time, which is pretty desirable. And then to slide where that is in my antenna, I just grab all those vertices and move them. See how I'm just moving all of them together. I can't move it past that point, that will break it, and I can't move it past that point, that will break it. Just in between that edge there, or those vertices there and those vertices there, until you're happy with it. Last but by no means least is we're going to rotate all of these components together. Don't forget, like I mentioned before, you can resize them, you can rescale them, because I think this may be a bit too big, but I'll leave that up to you. And all you need to do is just tap the bits you want to select with a marquee. So you see I'm just tapping, I'm not selecting the whole thing, just tapping. I'm going to rotate. I can use the E key on my keyboard or click rotate it there. I'm going to rotate it on that axis, and you see how it's broken, how it's done one by one, which is not what we want. That is because it's doing it locally using that bar there. In this case, I do want view. View will do it as a group, which is desirable. It's what I want. Then I'm just going to kind of eyeball this till I'm happy with it. And we could easily add additional detail. We could easily say make one bit smaller or make it so it's not poking through. But I'm kind of happy with that. What I am going to do though is on this object, because there's a little bit of a gap and that would bother me, I'm going to go onto that, click on the vertex mode or even edge mode, really doesn't matter. I'm just going to grab this edge and move it down into the sphere. Like I said, out of sight, out of mind. And that kind of looks okay. We've got our antenna lump and it looks alright. I'm going to take a quick save of it at this point. Sputnik 2 makes a lot of sense. And then I'm just going to grab all of those elements and I'm going to do a series of mirrorings. Now, anything where you rotate around a sphere, I encourage that you mirror. Mirror is this tool up here. It will ask how you want it mirroring, and do you want to make a copy, an instance, or no clone at all. In this instance, we do want to make an instance. That was far funnier in my head. And what this will do is it will make an exact duplicate, and if I change one, it will change the other. But I don't want to rotate it on the x-axis or the y-axis. I want to do it on the z-axis because this is going to form the bottommost one. Going to move that down. Now I am going to eyeball this, but I'm going to eyeball this in the front viewport where I can see in wireframe roughly how much the green one in my case goes through the sphere. Then I can do the same over here. Roughly how much does it go through the sphere? Again, just making sure I don't accidentally go too far. So far, so good. Next challenge. I'm going to use Control Select. So I'm selecting all of these components again. You know you've got it right if your gizmo is now in the center. So the move, rotate, or scale gizmo is in the center. It averages all of the positions for all of them. So if you miss an object out, it will not be the midpoint between all of your groups, if that makes sense. So I've just control clicked and I've got all of those. This time I'm not going to mirror it. This time I'm going to do edit and clone. I could drag, and I do want an instance. I could shift and drag, but this is a better way of doing it because I can now rotate, right click rotate. Keep in mind now that there is an exact duplicate for both of those objects in exactly the same place the other ones are. So you can't see them, but they're there. I'm going to find which axis I want to rotate it around. It's definitely not that one. Definitely not that one. Definitely not that one. Also, I've got some wildness going on. What are you doing? Okay, this is the one instance where we don't want to use absolute world. We want to use offset world. So you see how that's going to put it. Now I can, the second I release this value, it will disappear. So you see how that's gone back to 0. So now I know it's that axis I want to rotate around. I'm just going to put 90, rotate 90 degrees. I now know that that is confidently in the correct place. Beep, beep, beep. There we go, Sputnik built. We can texture map it, we can make it look really attractive. We could add those little bits of detailing that we would have in there. We can resize things if we think they're too big, going back to our original reference photo. Perhaps these were a little bit too big, or you do want to put that bit of detailing in that I've missed out. Perhaps you want to put that little prop in there that's actually pushing it away from the spherical body. There we go, Sputnik, built in however many minutes.